Good evening, live from my favorite place in the city, Karura Forest. And we hope you can join us for the next 1.5 hours, talk about the Africa Climate Summit. My name is Zainab Wandati, and we are just about 10 days to the Africa Climate Summit, and so many questions from Africans, so many questions from young people, how they can participate, how they can be part of the summit, and we have the answers. I have a panel here that might be able to answer some of those questions, how you can participate in that conversation in the Africa Climate Summit, what you can do as a young person, because the Africa Climate Summit is looking for solutions. We've talked about the impacts of climate change. The impacts of climate change in Kenya, in Africa, have been documented, and what Africa wants at every single COP, what Africa wants. But this year, Kenya is looking to change this narrative, to not just talk about these impacts, or not just talk about what the continent wants, but also bring solutions to the table. What are the solutions that Africa can bring, that the world can adopt in order to survive this climate crisis that we have all found ourselves in? So I'd like to introduce my panel tonight. Right next to me is Dr. Pacifica Ogolla from the Ministry of Environment. Dr. Pacifica is the director in the Climate Change Directorate, which is in the Ministry of Environment. And next to Dr. Pacifica, we have Ebeneza Amadi, who is a program manager at KEPSA. Welcome, Ebeneza, the only gentleman in this team. The only gentleman on the team. I hope gender rule for once, women have flouted the two-third gender rule. Usually it's men. And next to Ebeneza, we have Kathambi Karia, who's the CEO of CRADE. Welcome. And last but not least, Linda Munyao, who is an environmental scientist and also an a consultant in this environmental space. So we encourage you to take part in this conversation. The hashtag to use is on your screen, ACS23. You can also engage with me at Zain Wandati, Z-E-Y-N Wandati, Twitter's at NTV Kenya, with using that hashtag ACS23. Twitter's your questions, your comments, and we'll be able to bring those questions to our panelists here and discuss them. We have a live studio audience here at Karura Forest tonight, and we'll also be engaging with them as the night progresses. So let's get started. Pacific, I'd like to start with you. Let's start with the basics. What is the Africa Climate Summit seeking to do?
Thank you very much, Zainab, and thank you very much for welcoming us here. The Africa Climate Summit is a new, bold vision. It's a paradigm shift from the normal, from what Kenyans are used to, and from what the world is used to. For a very long time, we've been focusing on climate change negotiations, and we've also been focusing on struggling to look for finances to implement climate resilience projects and also to reduce carbon emissions. And with that, we have not made much progress since the adoption of the convention in 1992. And as a result, His Excellency the President, who is the chair of the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate Change under the auspices of the Africa Union, decided to introduce a new paradigm shift, to change in which the way we view the world, and to maximize the potential that Africa has as a continent to exploit its resources and to present these resources to the world, and ask for the world to also support the summit by providing finance and technology. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. So that's what the summit is about. But the summit will also be held in parallel with the Africa Climate Week, which is under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, from the 4th to the 8th of September.
So we'll talk a little bit about details, about the details of what this paradigm shift Kenya is looking for looks like. But now let's listen to the private sector perspective. Ebeneza, you're from the private sector. And even when you talk about development projects, there's always this talk about the private sector must be involved. As a private sector, what are you bringing to the table in this climate conversation?
Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation today with great minds. As you said, I'm an older gentleman here, and I feel quite warm being in the middle here. So one of the things that the private sector is looking at, of course, as Doc mentioned, is the level of investment. We're actually looking at innovations that could be brought out to support in meeting the reduction in NDCs, national determined contributions. One of the things that we say is that the private sector plays a key role, especially when you look at the focus sectors that are tagged to be able to reduce emissions. One of it is, of course, if you look at the green economy strategy and implementation plan, there are quite a number of issues that are articulated there, including social inclusion. We're also looking at sustainable production and consumption. So that's where the private sector comes into play. And with the element of investments, of course, I was also saying that sometimes we need to look at things from a different perspective, because a business person will always look at where the business is, but the government will also look at how the country benefits. And of course, the contribution to the GDP, where does it come from? It's from the private sector. We ideally have different sectors that then contribute to the GDP of the country. For example, in Kenya, our GDP is at 110 billion. And I was just looking at the statistics in terms of the potential. For example, if we look at the solar sector, so globally, the solar sector has a potential of about 373 billion USD up in when we get to 2029. But if we zero down to Kenya, then we see that there's a potential for solar. For households, it's about 63 million USD. But in terms of the other elements, it's about 300 million. So looking at all those aspects, I think the private sector is quite interested. And the government is also looking at how we then contribute to reducing our emissions.
So you're looking for investments, both to buy and to sell some of the solutions that people are coming up with. Are you working with some of these people who are providing these solutions directly?
Yes, as the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, so the Kenya Private Sector Alliance is an apex body of the private sector. So we then work with business membership organizations and also work with direct businesses. For example, Kenya Association of Manufacturers is one of our members, and we also have direct members who come in. But we also have a section that we call the Business Hub that work with foreign institutions and embassies when we have the investments visits and exchange, where we see where's the potential for investment in Kenya. And those are some of the things that we normally engage in. For example, we had a session with the EU, so we had the EU Business Forum, where we had deal rooms, and we had an exchange from different institutions. So that's where we see, and in the East African region, of course, we also play a key role in terms of looking at enhancing trade, in terms of reducing the non-tariff barriers, and also looking at harmonization of laws. So we also engage in influencing policy and advocacy. So that's one of our aims. And our major vision is to ensure that we create an enabling environment for businesses. So even as we talk about climate change, we're looking at what is in it for the country, and how then can we use our resources wisely.
Yes. Karia, you work with policies and strategies in the environmental space. What do you think of Kenya's new strategy to use the SES to push for new financing models in climate financing?
I think it's fantastic. The question of climate finance and the adequacy of it for the continent, I think, is front and center, because when we talk about climate change, the first thing that always comes up is that the continent is not receiving sufficient climate finance flows to address the challenges of climate change. And so I think it's critical and it's important and it's laudable that the summit has put the issue of climate finance front and center. I think most of us are looking forward to see what kind of innovative ideas around climate finance come out of it, that sort of feed into all the progress that and efforts that everyone is making to make climate finance scale and to make it affordable for the continent.
Yeah. Have you seen some of these innovative solutions in your work as you consult on the ESG?
Yes, of course. I mean, there's, I think the question of whether innovative finance, climate finance instruments exist, yes, they do. That loads of people are working to make sure that they exist. I'll give you some examples of like de-risking instruments, for example, guarantees that, sort of address the idea of risk in the continent, or the perception of risk, so to speak. And effectively what these kinds of instruments do is they reduce the high cost of returns that private sector players perceive, that keeps them away from investing in the continent. And so those are the innovations, those and many other innovations, of course, but there's always space to expand that suite of offerings, but also to bridge the knowledge and capacity gap, because it's one thing to develop the instruments, and it's another thing for governments and African nations to actually take advantage of those instruments.
Yes.
And so I think that is probably one of the things that will be interesting to see.
And Linda, as an environmentalist yourself, do you feel that the African people themselves have been adequately involved in these discussions of the SES?
Specifically, SES, I would say that because the president has been very keen, then he's really pushing the agenda that it's time for Africa to be part of the solution and not being seen as part of the problem. Remember, the theme for this summit is green growth and climate financing. So green growth is about making sure that Africa is positioned to be part of the solution to climate change. And I think there's been this narrative for a long time that we are the nation, the continent that's having all these problems, that's, all the solutions come from other continents, but that needs to change. Because if we're looking at green growth, you're looking at green energy, and Africa has the potential to literally power the entire world with green energy. So you see, we form part of the solution, and it's time for us to come front and center to the table as equals in the discussion on, climate change and how to move the, the global discussion forward. So yes, definitely, it's our time. We are the solution, and we just have to get together as Africans into that psyche that we have the resources that are going to move the world into, a new and better place, the paradigm shift that Pacifica was talking about. So yes, definitely, Africa, we are here. And we're not going to be silent. And I think that's what the president is really trying to push with this particular summit, that we can't continue to occupy that disadvantaged space. Yeah.
Pacifica, she's mentioning the president and what the president is trying to do here. But the same president has also been criticized for focusing a lot on foreign, what the West wants as opposed to what Africa wants. So maybe take us through how this agenda for the summit was designed, how many African countries participated in that, and if it's true that we are actually injecting some Western ideas in it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Zainab. In this world, no matter what you do, you'll find people saying that you have done the wrong thing. You'll always find critics. And if you're focused on your agenda and you know where you want to go, then you will continue walking the journey regardless of the complaints that you hear about. And what the president is trying to do is to get all of us from the comfort zone, from what the narrative that we are used to. For example, I'll give you an example. We are used to this, the 100 billion promise that was given to us in Copenhagen in 2009. And somebody, actually a colleague in one of the meetings just called it's like a tranquilizer. So we know very well that the cost of mitigating climate change has gone high. It's not the same 100 billion equivalent that was promised 13 years ago.
At COP26,
At
COP26, UNEP had released a report that said the cost could actually be 5 times higher.
Yeah, 5 times higher. There's a UNFCCC report that talks about even 6 trillion. Yeah, so there's adaptation gap report when it comes to adaptation financing. There's also mitigation gap that we need to close. So there's all these numbers that have been put out there using different scientific reports. And what we are saying is that we cannot achieve to raise climate finance or to double adaptation finance as we anticipate by just focusing, by doing the thing that we have been doing and expecting
Different results.
different results. So that's number one. And one of the things that we have to talk about and talk about honestly is about the debt crisis that most African countries are facing right now. So on top of the debt crisis, they're also suffering from the impacts of climate change. So what we are saying in the summit is that we also have to have an honest conversation about debt crisis, the distress that we are going through, and that the global financing system is currently not working, is not fit for purpose. And if we continue with the path that we are taking, and we are hoping for something to change, then we will be stuck in this vicious cycle of debt and climate impacts. And, so what the president is saying that to address this problem, we need to get out of the comfort zone, and we need to talk about this new global financing system. That's number two. The third thing that is also very clear is that we are talking about the green growth. The agenda is green growth. And we are talking about harnessing Africa's renewable energy potential as an example. The most recent IRENA report estimates that Africa's renewable energy potential is at 10,000 gigawatts. And only 10% of that goes to the grid. I think here in Kenya we are lucky because over 92% of the electricity that goes to the grid is from renewable energy sources.
Yes.
And so what we are doing now is bringing this potential to the world and saying that other than in our decarbonization pathway, we are planning to leapfrog a carbon-intensive economy because we have this renewable energy potential, and we also have, of course, we also have fossil fuels. But we are going to make a deliberate intention to invest in this renewable, because investing in renewable energy is investing in energy security. And this has been demonstrated. If you look at what is happening, for example, in Europe, with a high dependency on imported fuels, much as the installed capacity is very high, the energy security aspect is a bit shaky. So we do not want Africa to go that pathway, and that Africa, with Africa's potential, we can actually, if we're able to connect the entire world, we're actually able to decarbonize the world. And we also have 30% of green energy transition minerals. These are minerals that are used in producing energy technologies, like, for example, lithium for batteries. And some of these minerals are found in DRC, Congo, South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe. So the potential in Africa is very, very high. And most of these countries are actually exporting these minerals unprocessed. And by exporting these minerals unprocessed, it means that you're also exporting you're exporting jobs.
Yes.
And you're also exporting opportunities to make sure that you get the maximum benefit from those mineral resources.
I'd like you to put a pin in that bit of jobs. We'll come back to that jobs. And I'd like to bring in Ebenezer here. Ebenezer, she's talked a lot about green growth and pushing for green growth. What does green growth look like in the private sector?
So this is an interesting conversation for the private sector, because when you talk about green growth, talk about climate change, the private sector looks at it from a perspective of a business mindset. So we look at climate change as one of the risk factors. For example, when you look at a risk matrix, an example, if I use a sector like tourism, if the weather patterns change, and we do not have the wildebeest on our side, it means then the tourism will go low, right? It means most of our hotels will not be functional. So that's a risk factor. If you look at the banking sector, for example, if they financed the agriculture sector and the weather patterns also change and the crop did not do well, it means that they will not be able to pay. That's another risk factor. It means that the portfolio at risk for the bank will actually increase. So those particular elements then, from a business perspective, then there's an angle of risk, but also there's an angle of opportunity. When she talks about exporting jobs and actually increasing efficiency, when you increase efficiency, we're expecting your cost to go low. So it means that your cost of production is actually supposed to reduce. So that's a good thing for business. And we're looking out for innovations that will be able to support businesses to enhance efficiency. When you talk about energy, then and green energy, that's another thing for business, which is actually very good, because in manufacturing, the cost of energy is one of the greatest contributors in terms of the ratio of cost of production. So if you're able to transition to energy that will help to reduce that cost, that's a benefit to business, and it could translate to the consumer, depending on how the forces of demand and supply are playing out in the market, or it could increase the profitability of the institutions. So that's how we look at it from a business perspective.
Let me ask you this. You know, also from the business perspective, the private sector does contribute to carbon emissions through the manufacturing industry, or your industries are not as clean as they should be. What are you doing as the private sector to climate-proof yourselves and to ensure that you, as we talk about green growth, you're doing your fair share of the responsibility in cutting your footprint?
Thank you so much for the question, but I would like to look at the question from a different perspective. Everyone in the economy does contribute to emissions. So it's not just about the private sector and saying you guys, private sector, are contributing to pollution and emissions of greenhouse gases. Of course, that we play our part in terms of the emissions because of production, of course, transportation in terms of logistics. And if you look at the agriculture sector, of course, waste, food loss also contributes to that. So it's a matter of looking at how we're able to reduce that. And I'm loving the conversation because before this, we were just having a chit chat with the four great minds, five including you. Was that the element of the private sector in terms of reducing our emissions kicks in really well when we are able to find innovations.
Innovations.
Yes. And that's one of the things that we are looking at when we are talking about the potential for the country to move towards circularity. And circularity is a component where we talk about reduction or redesigning out waste. In Kenya, for example, we have the National Sustainable Waste Management Act of 2022. And we also have the draft EPR regulation. And the private sector played a key role in having a conversation with government through the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry. I'm sure Doc here will attest to that. When we said, why don't we transition our packaging so that it's more sustainable? So the Act introduced the element of circularity within waste management. So that's a point where...
How is that working out, considering there was also that arrangement again that KEPSA came up with, I think it was 2 or so years ago, about recycling the PET bottles, yet you still keep seeing them in the environment every day. So is the missing link the enforceability of these laws on your end, or what is that missing link?
So this, I mean, I would like to call it, it's progressive. Right? So we're not where we are 5 years ago. And if you look at it right now, there's something that is being called polluter pays principle that's kicking in. And it's actually within the Green Economy Strategy and Implementation Plan, where it introduces a principle of polluter pays. So the private sector is actually taking the responsibility, and you will notice that a number of companies are championing the inclusion of what we're calling ESG, environmental, social, and governance,
Yes.
and sustainability reporting. If I give you an example of one of the things that is happening in the market right now is Nairobi Securities Exchange is actually encouraging businesses that are listed to incorporate sustainability reporting within. So businesses are actually trying to track their emissions, trying to track their packaging. Under the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, you actually have the Kenya Plastics Pact, and we are encouraging our members to actually look at the design of their packaging, so to be able to reduce that which is going into the landfill, so and increase the recyclability rate.
Yeah, you know, can see
Come
both
to-
Linda
I
and
want to come
Kagambi
to
were
his
very
rescue.
keenly following.
I think Kenyans still have to take responsibility for the fact that our environment
littered
is
with
not as
plastic.
clean as it is. So many times we may point at private sector, and I'm not excusing private sector, but at the end of the day, we still have to take responsibility as individuals. Am I throwing my waste out of the vehicle? But again, that's beside the topic for today. But I was just keen to make that point, that even in matters climate change, it still comes down to individual responsibility. Thanks.
Individual. Kadambi, I see you're paying very keen attention to Ebenezer when he was speaking. Do you have something to add to what you were saying?
No, I mean, I just hold the complete opposite opinion. I mean, to put into context where we are at in terms of emissions and what's happening to changing climate as we know it, I think there's a certain danger or in, you know, this idea that personal responsibility. So I completely disagree when Amadi says that the private sector, because what we need is to decarbonize economies and at scale, right, and energy systems at scale. And I think reducing that responsibility to personal responsibility sort of distracts from the difficult work of
That requires to be done.
That requires to be done. So,
Wait, hold on. Before you respond, we need to take a very quick commercial break, and then when you come back, then you can explain yourself, maybe so that we can all understand what it is you mean. We'll be right back after this break, but remember, you can still keep engaging with us. The hashtag to use is ACS23 at Zain Wandati at NTV Kenya, and we'll sample some of your comments. Don't go away.
Warembo, ni nini muhimu kwenu mnaponunua body lotion?
Smoothness, scent, glow.
Nunua Nice and Lovely body lotion. Inai-transform dry skin kuwa deeply nourished na kui-smoothed. Na fragrance nayo, wacha tu.
Now available in the 850 ml pack.
Chagua Kenya's #1 body lotion.
Benefits of ordering with Glovo. Glovo allows you to order anything you want at the comfort and convenience of your home. Craving fried chicken or pilau or pizza? Easy and simple. Order on Glovo today. Glovo, order anything, we deliver in minutes. With Glovo, you order anything unataka, and when you get it una celebrate because kukuchoma imefika, na wakati keki inafika ndio sherehe inaanza. Order Glovo, will deliver in minutes.
We asked the children, how many of you brushed this morning? And this little boy, his hand didn't go up. And I said, well, why didn't you brush this morning? He said, my brother was using the toothbrush. If I'd waited for him, I would have been late for school. I'm sorry, I get a bit emotional when it comes to that. to be able to change a child's life, to be able to bring back that confidence about their smile, for me, is phenomenal.
It's the Premier League, all on DSTV. All the goals, clashes and moments, all of Rashford, Salah and Saka, all in the language of your choice, all in HD. Available on all these bouquets to choose from on all these devices. Dial *423# or download my DSTV app to get a DSTV HD decoder with 1 month of family for just 2,999 Kenya shillings. It's the Premier League on DSTV.
Angusha Kotroli kila wiki na Carrefour. Shika Pal Pishori rice at only $9.99, Von Fridge at $26,995, red grapes at $2.25, na assorted beef cuts at 35% off. Angusha Kotroli na Carrefour.
Run in a Minute brought to you by Nivea Nourishing Cocoa Body Lotion.
How well does your oil or lotion protect your skin? Ushaijiuliza hiyo swali? What we do to our skin is equally as important as how we do it. How often you apply lotion onto your skin is important. However, it's important to understand the content of every drop of lotion that we put on our skin. Nivea Nourishing Cocoa 5-in-1 has a perfect balance of nourishing benefits and lightweight comfort that sips into your skin for a delightful and smooth feeling. It penetrates into the layers of skin, nourishing and caring for your skin from huko deep within. Because it works under your skin's layers, it moisturizes your skin for up to 48 hours. The cocoa butter reduces the roughness of your skin, thus giving you smooth and healthy looking skin. With regular use, Nivea Nourishing Cocoa Body Lotion ensures your skin retains moisture and looks healthy over time. My name is Emma and this is Learn in a Minute.
Run in a Minute brought to you by Nivea Nourishing Cocoa Body Lotion.
With 5-in-1 Complete Care, the deeply nourishing formula prevents your skin from drying with precious cocoa butter and deep moisture for smooth and healthy looking skin.
Red Bull gives you wings.
Own your dream home for as low as 1.98 million Kenya shillings in Vipingo Kilifi. SMS Vipingo to 22365 or call us today on 0740 400 215. Terms and conditions apply.
Now, welcome back. And just before we went on break, we were having a conversation here about whether or not climate change is your personal responsibility. And while the private sector says, yes, it is your personal responsibility, Kathambi does not agree. She says, no, the private sector cannot be absolved from its fair share in contributing to the carbon footprint that the world is trying to deal with. So, Ebenezer, you wanted to respond to Kathambi?
Yeah, I mean, I generally said that every person in the country or in the globe contributes to emissions, right? We're starting from the way you eat, what remains you throw away, it doesn't limit. Beginning and also going with your logistics, I mean, how you move from your place of work back to home and back, so forth. So I'm not saying that that the community is the only contributor or the private sector is the only contributor. Everyone does contribute. But here we're looking at how then do we transition to reducing our emissions. And that's the conversations that we're having in terms of climate change. If you go to the scientists when they're telling you that we need to ensure that our temperatures do not go beyond 2 degrees Celsius, but what they're projecting in 2050, so it remains at 1.5 in terms of the growth. So the private sector does then take that responsibility, and that's why I mentioned that what we're looking at in terms of incorporating the 3 elements of sustainability when you talk about people, planet, and profit. And that's the same thing you can project when you're looking at ESG. There's the environment part, there's the social part, and then there's the governance part. So the environment part is actually very key for us. And that's why when we started off, I said that the private sector is actually keen to look at innovations, look at efficiency in terms of reducing the amount of energy that we're able to consume, and actually also look at innovations in terms of E&D, in terms of our packaging. So those are critical elements that we do have and incorporated within strategy. And actually, as CAPSA, that's one of the things that we champion and rally behind, where we are encouraging businesses also to do something that we call energy audits, so they're able to reduce their consumption. And right now, I know Kenya Power has actually introduced, it has been there, where manufacturers try to move their production mostly at night, instead of during the day.
When there's no pressure on the grid.
When there's no pressure on the grid, yeah.
I see. Pacifica, you know, we were earlier talking about whether or not the agenda of the Africa Climate Summit is indeed an African agenda, or if there's some Western influence in it. And you didn't quite answer that. Yes or no? Is there some Western influence in the agenda of the African Climate Summit?
Thank you very much, Zainab. The answer is no. I had started answering the question and I said, one, the focus is on harnessing Africa's renewable energy potential. And that is an African agenda, given the fact that 46% of Africans don't have access to electricity. And 900 million Africans still use fuel wood for cooking. And we have a resource potential that is unexploited, that is just sitting there. You just need to put a solar panel, you just need to expand the solar production, the wind production, the hydro potential, the geothermal potential that we have, and as a content we are enjoying. And I also mentioned about the green transition, energy transition minerals, and the fact that we are exporting jobs. And the fact that we have these minerals, and the summit is coming up with a solution and a strategic way of African countries having a common position of ensuring that they get their fair share in trade of these minerals. I think that is an African agenda, and that is a conversation that is happening globally. And I can take you back, because another thematic area that is key for this summit is on food systems and making sure that we have food sovereignty. I take you back to the time when we had COVID-19. And of course, during COVID-19, all flights were stopped, and we all had to use what we had within our countries. And also with the war in Ukraine, we saw what happened. But yet Africa still has 60% of the world's remaining uncultivated arable land. So what we are saying that Africa as a continent need to present these opportunities for investment to make sure that at least by 2030, but by 2050, that we become the world's bread basket. And the issue of food sovereignty is very key, because we don't know when another pandemic will happen. And I think every country in Africa should be working towards food sovereignty. And then we also talk about this Africa continental free trade area. Why is it that African countries are not trading with themselves? For example, you'll find that here in Kenya or in Somalia, there's a severe drought and we are losing livestock. And across the border is Uganda, which is a net food exporter. And only 20% of trade in food is happening between the African countries. And yet we are getting food aid from outside. So these are the things that the summit is bringing to fore and saying, how do we then unlock this potential that we have? And we are presenting this to the world. And we realize that we cannot do this alone. And we need partners to invest with in this journey. And we also say that we have some of the most diverse natural capital. And if you look at the Congo Basin, for example, is the lung of the world and is sequestering most of the emissions from other places. And by presenting this and asking for the fair share and asking to expand the trade between African countries, and when I say expansion, I even mean interconnecting electricity grids to improve access to energy within the continent, and even improve infrastructure to enable this trade that we are talking about, and attracting private investment to come to the continent. Because when we look at the emissions that we are talking about, and we are saying that by investing in Africa, that is where the potential is.
Yes.
Yeah, the potential to decarbonize the world
is in Africa.
Is in Africa. So why don't you invest in the potential? So if somebody thinks that this is not an African agenda, then I leave it to you because it is an African agenda. It's a very bold agenda. And what I would like to do is to embrace all of us to start this journey together and to shift our mindset towards making sure that we prepare ourselves to harness the potential that the continent has. And for me, one of the things that I say is that the measure of success for this summit is whether or not we have changed the mindsets of the majority in terms of the paradigm shift that we are fronting through this summit. And again, it's not something that will happen instantly. We realize that this is a journey. Yeah, it's a journey that is starting here, and this will not be the first summit. There'll be subsequent summits. We have a clear roadmap, and we invite everybody to listen and to work with us. And for private sector, I think they are very key in this summit.
Yes.
Yeah, they are going to sit with ministers and government officials and the youth and everybody else. So this is a good opportunity for private sector to listen and to learn from what is happening in other countries, and also to take advantage of the opportunities and the announcements that will be made during this summit to make sure that when we start moving, we are moving as a continent. So it's Africa in solidarity and saying, invest in the potential.
Now, when you mention invest, I need to ask you, as we wait for other people to bring us this investment, how are we ourselves investing in this green transition and green energy? And I know Kenya has done a lot of work with the energy space, but when you look at the relationships between the ministries, there seems to be some disconnect, because when the Ministry of Roads builds roads, they forget that the green transition also includes pedestrian or non-motorized transport, and so that is not factored in this construction. How are you as the Ministry of Environment investing this information that you want other people to invest in Africa here at home, and making sure that all of the ministries know in all of the projects you do, you must ensure that you are doing green transition together?
Yeah, thank you very much, Zainab. And I think it's good you asked this question because we've attended so many meetings with you. And one of the things that we have done is that we've allocated, as the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, we've allocated sector-specific targets through what we call the National Climate Change Action Plan. So in these targets, there are targets for renewable energy, for reducing energy efficiency, for improving energy efficiency, for making sure that we meet our tree cover targets, and so on and so forth. And the government has also put deliberate measures and policy instruments to make sure that every ministry is implementing what is expected of them. For example, the President's 15 billion target, which is also our target, is now being mainstreamed in all ministries. So it's a responsibility of all ministries. Even counties are now responsible for implementing this 15 billion target of trees. And we need to also, as Kenyans, because sometimes you see Kenyans complaining the government is not doing this, the government is not doing that. But sometimes we also need to take that responsibility of making sure that we are conserving our environment. For example, if I know that I'll need to live in a clean environment when I retire in the village, then I should be going to the village and making sure that I'm planting those trees that I want to see and
But
protecting
conserving the
them.
environment is not just planting trees.
I'm saying, for example, this is an example. It's not just about planting trees. This is an example. I should go to the village and make sure that my surrounding
is clean.
And I have a lot of fruit trees, and I have all these things. And I also have to make sure that I contribute towards protection of my small water sources, in the village to improve my living conditions. And at national level, again, there are a lot of policy instruments that the government has taken. For example, if you look at our energy policies and the way they are creating an enabling environment for investment, and particularly private sector, in incentivizing clean technologies. And we are also now, we've just yesterday the Parliament passed the climate change bill, which is going to open up opportunities for trading in carbon markets. So there's
carbon is another very hot potato.
It's unlimited. The potential is unlimited. I think it's all in our mindset. Thank you.
Carbon trading is another. Is any of you in this space, trading in the carbon market space at the moment? Are you in the carbon market space?
Yes, I mean, but I'm not a fan of carbon trading because...
So you believe it's greenwashing?
Yes, of course. I mean, for the most part, it is. And that's a long conversation. But I think that it still goes back to this idea of there's too much distraction. Everybody's distracted by things. The private sector particularly, because they are very profit motivated. And so the carbon... I'm sorry, Amadi, this is... and so it's great that there is interest in that, but I think it's very important that we are clear that carbon offsets and trading are not the panacea for climate action and climate change, right? The kind of decarbonization that we need to be doing is not going to be solved by these ideas of carbon offsets. If any movement, any significant movement, I think, and I hope this is something that the Climate Summit will explore, needs to be looking at the carbon offsets, the pricing, right? We need to be valuing the carbon at way higher, more significant prices, and also in terms of the length of the contracts and things like that. Because the statistics now, about 80% of carbon offsets that are being traded are greenwashing. They don't meet the standards for what integrity...
And there was actually a report, was it last year, that there was some fake, some of those offsets are found to be fake.
Yes, because I mean, when you look at what makes for integrity in a carbon offset, you're looking at things like additionality, permanence, leakage, all these kind of like technical things that scientists are looking at. And most of the offsets don't meet those standards. And so basically what we are doing is we are just taking the climate conversation away.
Maybe we need to back up for a moment and explain what is a carbon market and what does it mean to carbon trade. Linda, I think you have a response.
To put it in a very simple way, and why I think we as Africa are trying to move the conversation towards what we are calling just transitioning. You see, it's this whole idea of don't cut down those trees and then we'll pay you to do this. But that may not be beneficial for all of us in the long run. Because remember, our priority as Africa is we have to grow. We have a young population that's coming up, and we need to grow our economies. The discussion that this convention or this conference is going to talk about is how can we grow in a manner that is sustainable? Because Africa must grow. We have a very large population. And how are we going to move our people out of poverty? It's because we need to do that through economic, development and growth. So this is going to entail some difficult conversations. And that's why this is an African agenda that it's time for us to develop. And we know that the West has made mistakes in their time of growth. They really had a lot of pollution, and this is why we are all facing this climate crisis right now, because of the decisions that they made in that time. But you see, right now there's technology available for us to be able to grow in a green manner. So it may not just come down to let's don't cut down those 2 trees, dear Africa, so that we can continue to, cause, this and that, while you guys just stay in that position and preserve those 2 trees. No, it's time also for us to grow, but we need to do it sustainably. And that's what we are trying to talk about in this particular conference.
Yeah.
It's about growing green, growing sustainably, and saying that Africa has the resources and the opportunity to do that right now. We just need to have those difficult conversations about technology transfer, about making sure that our people have the right capacity to be able to take advantage of this situation that we are in now. And that's the conversation that we are trying to push the world towards. And that's why it may not be a really popular idea, because it's time for Africa to stand up. And I know I said it at the beginning, but we actually have the opportunity. It's not just talk. We have the population, we have the resources. I mean, we were talking about the green minerals that Pacifica was talking about. Look at cobalt, look at lithium. 30% of these resources are found in Africa. But what is the supply chain from it leaving Africa all the way until it gets to that phone? And who is profiting from, this entire supply chain? Why don't we then have all that focused here so that we can grow our economy, taking advantage of our resources, using our people to grow our continent? And
So
it
you
can be
support
done
the idea of
sustainably.
carbon trading?
Yeah, I'm saying carbon trading, but that's not carbon trading. Carbon trading is the one of don't cut that
Yes,
tree,
don't
we'll
cut
give
it.
you money not to cut the tree.
Do you support that?
And stay, don't develop.
Okay.
I mean, a very small portion of it is going to solve our environmental problems. But the big idea that we are still talking about is that we want to grow sustainably as a continent. And it's
Are
possible.
trees the only way we can trade carbon?
Sorry?
Are trees the only way we can trade in carbon? And I'd like to put a pin in that. We'll come back with the responses to that. If growing trees and planting trees and forests are the only way carbon markets work. And I know there's so many questions about this area, and I'm glad it has finally come up. So many questions about this area and how people can participate in it. More on this right after this break. Maji sasa ikama.
Acne's Creamy Wash is a foamy and gentle cleanser that removes sebum and dirt in the pore. Step 2. Acne Soothing Toner maintains skin pH. Step 3. Acne Sealing Gel quickly clears pimple-causing bacteria. The latent acne clears, cares, and helps prevent pimple.
Show off your best skin with Nivea Nourishing Cocoa Body Lotion. Now with 5-in-1 Complete Care. The deeply nourishing formula prevents your skin from drying with precious cocoa butter and deep moisture for smooth and healthy looking skin. Step out in confidence with our most complete care from the world's #1 skincare brand.
Angusha Kotroli kila wiki na Carrefour. Shika Pal Pishori rice at only $9.99, Von Fridge at $26,995, red grapes at $2.25, na assorted beef cuts at 35% off. Angusha Kotroli na Carrefour.
Wing of bat and foot of crow, eagle's egg and seagull's toe, bits of wasp and ooze of fly. Soon I too can reach the sky.
Mom, are you still busy cooking?
You are welcome to come and help me a bit, Freya.
Oh, Mother, there's no helping you anymore, don't you know? Red Bull gives you wings.
When you're finally released from pain. That moment when you start to get back to ordinary, and ordinary feels amazing. Whatever pain you're going through, release starts here.
To protect our family from germs that cause illness when it's cold, we use Dettol soap.
Dettol soap with germ defense gives you protection. When it's cold, germs are transferred in different ways, and Dettol soap's germ defense protects you from up to 100 illness-causing germs. Be Dettol sure.
Now introducing the new 125-gram Dettol soap at only 200 shillings.
Warembo, ni nini muhimu kwenu mnaponunua body lotion?
Smoothness, scent, glow.
Nunua Nice and Lovely body lotion. Inai-transform dry skin kuwa deeply nourished na kui-smoothen. Na fragrance nayo, wacha tu.
Now available in the 850 ml pack.
Chagua Kenya's #1 body lotion.
This is NTV.
NTV Tonight Headlines in association with NCBA Bank. Tonight,
we are going to open up 6 security roads in Lamu.
Determined to end security lapses, Interior CS Kithure Kindiki vows to end sporadic attacks in Lamu as he lauds the disbarment operation in the North Rift. Also tonight, tough stands and new demands. National Dialogue Committee to be presented with new demands from the Jubilee Party tomorrow. We have the lowdown. Plus,
students will be around as we are working on this, and I think we have made it clear to our public universities, and they will be admitted while we are processing disbursement of funds to all our public universities.
Panic and assurances. Education CS Ezekiel Machogu says only a third of all students set to join university next week have applied for funding. And battling malfeasance on a leash. A catch-22 situation created by the politicization of the war on corruption. Can we dialogue the nation out of graft? Front and center tonight. NTV Tonight Headlines in association with NCBA Bank.
In over 60 years of dealing with numbers, we've learned that the numbers that matter the most to you are the ones that matter the most to us. NCBA Bank. Go for it.
This is the best serum I've ever used.
9 out of 10 agree Garnier Even and Matte Vitamin C Serum is the best they've used. Our highest concentration of derm actives.
Made my skin tone more even. Brightens up my skin with an instant glow.
Bye-bye, dark marks. Even and Matte Vitamin C Serum. 9 out of 10 agree it's the best serum they've used. By Garnier, naturally.
We love to share our cultures. And the one thing that unites us all, that celebrates precious moments, nurtures our Kenyan spirit, drives success, welcomes, and even inspires. Our language does all of this and more. Na ni lugha ambayo kila Mkenya anajua. The more the milk, the better the chai. Chai kweli ina Brookside Dairy Best.
Angusha Kotroli kila wiki na Carrefour. Shika Pal Pishori rice at only $9.99, Von Fridge at $26.995, red grapes at $2.25, na assorted beef cuts at 35% off. Angusha Kotroli na Carrefour.
This is the best serum I've ever used.
9 out of 10 agree Garnier Even and Matte Vitamin C Serum is the best they've used. Our highest concentration of derm actives.
Made my skin tone more even. Brightens up my skin with an instant glow.
Bye-bye, dark marks. Even and Matte Vitamin C Serum. 9 out of 10 agree it's the best serum they've used. By Garnier, naturally.
Own your dream home for as low as 1.98 million Kenya shillings in Vipingo Kilifi. SMS Vipingo to 22365 or call us today on 0740 400 215. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back. Well, carbon markets are such a hot topic. Unfortunately, it's such a it's not something that we can exhaustively discuss in this conversation here. A lot of your questions coming in about carbon markets and how they can benefit from these markets, what they would need to do in order to get started. So maybe you could take one quick comment. Katambi, I know you feel very strongly about this space. How, if somebody wanted to participate in the carbon market, how will they start?
Do you mean as a private sector player or?
The question did not clarify, so maybe as an individual, maybe?
Well, I mean, so what we have at the moment is a voluntary carbon market. So that's how maybe a private person would participate in those markets. And the idea behind carbon offsetting, whether I agree with it or not, notwithstanding, is, you do activities that contribute to carbon sequestration. For some people, it might be trees, although, I mean, the integrity of trees as a way of sequestrating carbon is not the most credible. It could be also what you're doing in your farm. As long as you're sort of locking in carbon that would have ordinarily been released through other activities. I think regenerative agriculture, for example, I think is one of the more fantastic ways of sequestrating carbon. And so we are seeing a lot of this coming up in terms of soil health. Soil is an amazing carbon sequestrator. So what you're doing in your farm, reducing the use of pesticides and herbicides and things that deplete, and fertilizers which deplete carbon. So I think if at an individual level, seeing everyone has personal responsibility, at an individual level, I think in addition to planting trees, I think what is happening in the agricultural sector is one of the more effective ways. And when you think about it, it feeds into our food security, into the soil health that allows us to continue feeding ourselves and so on and so forth. So if someone was starting, I would say go into research, regenerative agriculture, sustainable farming. I think for the continent, because most of our, 70% of the continent is smallholder farmers. I would say that's a good place to start looking into what sustainable agriculture and farming looks like.
And Pacifica, there are two questions here for you. One question says, how are you as organizers of the Africa Climate Summit ensuring that this summit does not negate the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities and the respective capabilities, which is quite critical? And then the second question says, what is the role of the African group of negotiators in this whole process?
Thank you very much, Zainab. I think when you asked that question, I just suspected that it's coming from one of the Africa group of negotiators, or a negotiator. They're the ones who know about common but differentiated responsibilities. I think as we planned the summit, we've been saying that since the convention was adopted in Rio in 1992, and since we had our first COP, I think this is the 28th, this is going to be the 28th meeting of Conference of Parties, where we meet to discuss about how to solve this problem of climate change. And the principles that have guided the convention is that one of common but differentiated responsibility, which means that we have a common goal of managing the climate change problem, but at the same time, the responsibilities are differentiated based on your capacity. That's why it's called CBDR-RC, respective capacity to manage this. And we are saying that, yes, it's good to continue with the multilateral processes, and AGN should definitely continue with the multilateral processes because it's a process which has already been, is happening. But we are saying also that this should not be the only process that we are using. This should not be the only channel that we are using to solve the global climate problem. And that's why I said in the beginning, like, for example, a lot of targets and IPCC reports have been released, the intergovernmental scientific reports that have been released, saying where we are in terms of emissions and what we need to do to reduce. A lot of promises have been made on climate finance. Despite this, emissions are still skyrocketing. Climate finance is still not flowing. So we are saying the group of negotiators who are at the technical level, sort of like where I am, are doing their bit. And you've seen them in the negotiating room, making sure that we get the right text and making sure that we get what is needed to be achieved from a COP. But now we have reached a place where we need the political leadership to give the new policy direction and the paradigm shift and that alternative route to help us achieve our climate goals and also to help us improve access to climate finance and to help us invest in our resource potential. Because if we sit back here and we say that our focus is just going to be negotiating and saying common but differentiated responsibilities, while year after year, IPCC report after IPCC report, the impacts are getting worse. We are now getting like the cyclones in Mozambique, the droughts are intensifying, the floods are getting worse. Yeah, it's good to continue negotiation, but it's also about time
that you change the direction.
That we change the direction, we have a paradigm shift and put a little bit more pressure from a political perspective.
Let me ask you this. If all the COPs you've attended, you've seen the politicians coming there and making all these pronouncements, and you're talking about political will, and they seem to show political will, but then at the negotiation table, nothing happens. So what guarantee do you have that all this political will you're trying to harness for the African Climate Summit is going to result in actual changes on the ground if for the last 30 or so years, the COP hasn't been able to deliver any meaningful change?
No, I'm saying we have made some progress with COP. I'm not saying that we have not done much. But I'm also saying that the pronouncements that have been made by leaders at COP, some of those indeed have not translated into
meaningful change.
Into meaningful change, and that is a fact. And I think that for a very long time, and particularly for us as Africans, this is the first Africa Climate Summit. We've never had a situation where all African heads of state are sitting down to discuss climate change. I think we have to give credit to our president, being the first CAHOS chair, to actually think about convening all African heads of state to sit down and have this conversation. And we are not just going to have a conversation and walk away. We are saying that we are going to have a commitment document, which is the outcome document of the summit, which is the African Leaders Nairobi Declaration. Yes, which is not going to end here. We are going to table this at the UN General Assembly, which is happening immediately after the summit, and also during the UN Secretary General's Climate Action Summit. And from this, all the way to
the COP.
To the COP.
So that will be the African position.
And it will inform the decision, the way we discussed the cover decision. So elements of this, we've just concluded the African ministerial meeting in Addis last week, where we also discussed some of the outcomes of the summit. And we're able to have in the decision some of the things that we are proposing from the summit. And one of the biggest agenda that should be transformative is the new global finance architecture. Yes, and I think this is the conversation that we want to focus on, and we want the summit really to take forward. As we've heard several times that when the president says that if you're not sitting on the table, then you must be on the menu. So we are not, we know what is happening, and I don't want to go into details of what is happening, but how do we do this in a way that we are also sitting on the table and that we are getting, even when they're getting loans, we are not paying 8 times or more than our partners who are paying less, and that we also have a stake, and we are also able to make decisions on the table.
Yes.
So this conversation is just beginning. It's new, it's fresh, and it's not about. I think, and that's why I'm encouraging everybody, even the ones who are criticizing now, that we understand that it takes time to process this information. And I think it will take us time to change our mindset, And I want to say personally, having been in negotiating rooms for all these years, that I'm really excited to see for the first time African leaders convening to give the technical experts, the AGN and everybody, a direction. But that is not to say that when you go into the negotiating room, you just you drop your guard and let the wrong text get into the document.
Yeah, you must be alert.
You must be alert.
Yes.
So this is just to give you energy, to give you the momentum.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
To drive this agenda.
Yes.
The reality is that people are dying. Our people are dying, and something needs to change, and it's getting worse.
Yes.
Yeah. And yet we are rich. As we say, we are rich. We have the resources. So why are we walking around saying that we are poor? We are not poor. Africa is not a poor continent. I think it's probably
one of the wealthiest. Or
the wealthiest continent. If you do this resource assessment in terms of wealth, then we are one of the wealthiest continent. Talk about gold, diamonds, all these minerals.
They're
Talk
all
about the biodiversity, the
Yes.
forest.
Yes.
Everything, the rivers, we have it. We have everything. We have the most useful population. Yeah. So what is it that we need to do to make sure that we harness what we have, to improve our lives? And one way of doing that is not by saying I'm poor, is by saying I have this. Let's sit at the table. You have the money, you have the finance, and you have the capital, and you have the technology. And I have this. So how do we sit down and discuss to make sure that the engagement that we are having
is benefiting us both?
Is benefiting us both. It's not to say that you should not benefit from this, but we need to have an understanding that this is going to benefit us both. And to be honest with you, some of these things cannot be achieved on the negotiating table.
Yes.
And that is the reality that we have to confront.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pacifica. Vanessa, what do you want us to remember when we leave here today?
I think for the private sector, one of the things that is very critical when you talk about climate change, you even saw, I think recently when there was drought, the private sector was coming up to support the citizens. And that's not what we want to see as a country, because as Kenya is driving to grow to an export growth economy, we are saying that the country must benefit, and the private sector then drives the engine to support the country to become an export growth economy. Therefore, these issues are very critical for all of us. And one thing that Doc mentioned that also drives the point home is that one of the things that we're also looking at is the efficient use of our resources. And with the summit called the African Climate Summit, one of the things that we're looking at is what can the African countries do different so that we change the story, so that we do not look at what other people are doing or what they're not doing. What the question should be, what are we doing to change the story? We have nice sceneries in Africa that we must ensure that we keep them alive. One of the resources that is very key for our countries is water. So one of the things that we need to look at is our catchment areas. We need to look at how we integrate communities within our ecosystem, and just enhancing, of course, biodiversity and ensuring that we coexist within our community. So as the conversation was going here, and we were saying who then has the responsibility, co-responsibility of ensuring that we take care of environments, it's each and every one of us. And when you talk about the private sector,
You still stand by that.
who consists of the private sector? It's still us, right? So basically it comes back to myself as a Kenyan, myself as an African. What are we doing different to change our story?
Kathambi, in less than a minute, what do you want us to remember?
I think I'm a finance person, so I think one of the key messages that I would love to see come out of the summit is that, inadequate climate finance for the African continent is a global public risk. So if we don't have enough climate finance, sufficient finance at scale to deliver climate action, then the rest of the world, everybody's going down with us. So, yeah.
Yes, Linda, 30 seconds. What do you want us to remember?
I think I just want to address the leadership of our continent. That I hope that at the end of this summit, the Nairobi Declaration will have factored our people, and that for once, I would say, our leadership can speak with one voice.
Yes.
So that when we go to the negotiating table, with the rest of the world, that we can have a position for Africa that is beneficial to us as Africans. I think that's the most critical thing about this conference for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's an excellent point to leave it at. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for making time for this conversation, our live studio audience here at Karura Forest, and also you for joining us online and engaging with us. We couldn't sample all of your questions, but we will keep engaging as we go. My name is Zana Bondati. Do not go away. NTV Tonight is coming right up.